I'm
Let's do it.
Morgen. Everything fine on your end?
Everything's great. Thanks for having me, Robin.
Absolutely. Maybe before we get started with all the topics, give the people that listen and watch a little bit of a background of who you are and especially why you're excited about Bitcoin.
Yeah, so I have a financial planning practice. It's 11 years old as of this summer, and I've been involved in Bitcoin since 2013. But I haven't been advising on it for clients as long. I started advising on it in 2016, so I already felt like I was like a little bit behind in advising at the time. But like looking back on it, it's kind of funny now because 2016 to be advising on it was actually quite a long time ago. My practice is split between families who worked for me prior, like who before they knew about Bitcoin, who like have learned about Bitcoin through me, and then people who know me as someone who helps people in personal finance with Bitcoin who have come in that way. And so I've got like half a practice full of Bitcoiners who are like hardcore Bitcoiners who even have 100% positions because that's what they want to have. And I have like the more average financial planning client that you would imagine coming through as well, who has smaller Bitcoin positions, but they're still interested and they're storing their own keys and doing everything that they're supposed to be doing. And they've been orange pilled along the way and have been learning and so forth, and are still getting access to what I consider traditional financial planning advice. So like to me, Bitcoin is something that enhances and will certainly change the way things look over the next 10, 20, 30, 100 years or so forth, right? Like it's like I do believe it's going to be the world's monetary reserve, and that we're going in that direction. But in the meantime, we need to live in reality, and there are still some aspects of the traditional financial world that we need to just live with and adapt to. And then there are other aspects which I think will change as a result of Bitcoin being there.
Absolutely. And I think personal finance will always be around. It's this weird, and it probably was challenging for you, where there's a lot of Bitcoiners, at least that I encountered, that say, oh, like I'm just 100% in Bitcoin and that's all I need to know about finance. And yes, if you get Bitcoin, you already understand a lot of important things about money. There's low time preference, mindset, and all of that. But was it challenging to be in this personal finance world, which sometimes appears to be more fiat than it is, with Bitcoiners on like kind of getting the hate of both sides?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you do get hate on both sides, right? On the traditional finance side, for sure, I have people just think that I'm like I've lost. I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm not acting in clients' best interests, which I don't obviously believe is the case. And then the other side, yeah, I get Bitcoiners all the time who are like, well, your job's not even going to exist. Why do people need you? And the reality is that for the average person, financial planning shouldn't be that big of a deal, right? We shouldn't need to have this fiat financialized world that like even if you're just saving a little bit of money and trying to make your way in the world, you shouldn't have to consult a financial advisor, right? You should just be able to save money and wait until your assets have grown to the point where you're now making different financial decisions and you actually want or need the help of a financial advisor. So that's where I see our roles headed. Like the more that Bitcoin sort of permeates the system, the more that like I actually get to see complicated, complex, interesting problems. This is what humans are meant to be doing, rather than the sort of like the basic stuff. Like everyone still in a Bitcoin world or not, like in a fiat world or a Bitcoin world, you still need to have income coming in and have the expenses be less than your income, or at least match your income if you're in a retirement state, right? And then have whatever is at the bottom, right? Net savings. And so like that's just going to be the way that it is. That equation doesn't change whether you use fiat or Bitcoin, right? And then from there, it's like, okay, what am I doing with this money? Am I saving it for the long term, or am I saving it for the short term? Do I just want to save it, or do I want to invest it, right? There are also questions on top of what you do with that net savings that might just be Bitcoin, right? In which case, yeah, that does make some of my profession irrelevant, but doesn't make it completely obsolete, right? Because then there's going to be a subsector of the population whose net worth and assets are going to grow, and they're going to have all sorts of other complicated problems and things that come up, or things that they want to do that they're not sure how to fund and so forth, in which case they would turn to somebody like me and hopefully more advisors, right? Because I can't handle all of the questions in the world from everybody, right? My hope is that more financial advisors will get involved and see, oh, this is actually a really unique way for us to help clients, rather than it just being, okay, we're doing the fiat financial planning thing and that we're relevant because fiat makes things complicated, because we're actually providing a good service.
It's interesting because like I don't know a lot of financial planners in Bitcoin. I know I had probably 4, maybe 5 on them on my channel, but not a lot. So from like 600 guests, that says a lot, I feel like.
Yeah, I like to make the Arrested Development joke that there are dozens of us, and I actually don't even think there are dozens of us. I think there are less than dozens of us. But yeah, we're out there. We have a little network actually. We have the Bitcoin Financial Advisors Network, and there's a few of us on there who are all kind of catering to different Bitcoin clientele. So people can check that out. It's bitcoinfinancialadvisorsnetwork.com.
Interesting. What would you say is for the people that don't know what financial advisors do? What is the current state of the traditional financial advisors in a fiat world, and then maybe we can explore a little bit how Bitcoin will change that.
Yeah, sure. So in the traditional fiat world, what happens, right, is that we're all on this hamster wheel where we need to work as hard as we can to save money, right? And we're doing that because our money is melting in front of our eyes and we have a consumerism problem and we're always trying to figure out how to save and then also get ahead. And so in the traditional fiat world, what I see financial advisors' role is saying, hey, I'm going to help you your savings, your money, into investments as quickly as possible so that that money doesn't melt in front of your eyes, right? You still need to have all these other, traditional financial planning tactics where you have an emergency reserve and maybe you're allocating different places or you're taking advantage of a company retirement plan or whatever it is, and your financial advisor should be able to help you with that too. But their main role is as an asset allocator is to take that net savings and then to help you invest it in a way that makes sense given your risk tolerance, time horizon, unique circumstances, and so forth. Whether or not the industry is doing that, we could argue about, right? There are going to be some advisors who are great, right? There's going to be a bell curve. There'll be some people who are doing that in the middle and they're fine. There are going to be some advisors who are terrible and that you shouldn't go to, but tend to get clients anyway somehow because they're good at sales. There's going to be the top of financial advisors who are not only doing that, but they're also helping their clients with other financial planning issues and things that are coming up, or tax planning and estate planning. And that's the traditional world. In the Bitcoin world, I think you're going to have those top tier financial advisors still who are handling all of this. But the difference is that the asset allocation is not going to be as prevalent as it has been in the past. In the past, you didn't have an asset like Bitcoin to just hold money, to hold long-term savings. And so, right, like a lot of investment is going to become a little less relevant when you have a long-term savings vehicle. Right now, like if you're just in traditional fiat, there's no decision point there, right? It's like either I hold money and it melts, or I put it into like some sort of S&P 500 index type fund thing, right? Where at least it'll grow at, 7% real terms and I'll be fine. And so that's kind of what has been pitched at people for the last, 30 years, I would say, since index funds came out. And that like governments have even been moving people towards of like these low cost ETF or index style investments so that people aren't going to being taken advantage of from fees and so forth. But that doesn't necessarily solve the problem, right? The problem in and of itself is that people are being pushed beyond their risk tolerances to invest in a way that they might not feel comfortable with. And so with Bitcoin, right, it flips the script where you can say, okay, I just want to hold money. And then from there, I'm going to decide, okay, do I make investments or do I continue to hold money and then do planning around the money that I hold, like passing it to the next generation if I've really accumulated a lot of money, retirement planning tactics to make sure that like I'm getting the income that I need in retirement and I'm still preserving my assets, charitable giving or so forth, where there's all sorts of trusts that people can use, especially if they've accumulated a lot of Bitcoin, to actually take advantage of the tax laws as they stand today, and then also be charitable while they're still getting an income. So there's just a lot of options out there in the traditional finance world that you can put on top of Bitcoin that I think that advisors can really help with. But that's not going to be for the average Bitcoiner, right? For the average Bitcoiner who just wants to save money and they're just starting out, or they're young or whatever it is, right? They're just going to need to have income coming in, spend less than they make, and start saving, and go from there and see what they actually need from a financial advisor.
I think this is great because if you, like, that's a simple rule, especially when you're starting out, you just have one income stream and you have one savings device, which is Bitcoin, hopefully. And then you just pour the excess income in there and you save and you're good to go. But I think as life goes on, life gets more complicated than that, as I heard, and as I already experienced a little bit, where what happens when there's a company getting involved, what happens if there's different, maybe you want to move somewhere, like there's many different life complications coming your way where like, oh, okay, if I know about that, this makes this easier. And there's also this really big, and I'm not a big fan of it, but this big tax bureaucracy thing where if you know what you're doing in there, you can really save a lot of money. I learned a lot about taxes when I went from being employed to being self-employed, and now founding companies, so being more an entrepreneur. So like you learn so much about the system where like you look back 2 years and you're like, wait, like there's a better way, and there's that's how this works, and you're like, oh, okay. So there's a lot of I think in the beginning you said it so nicely. We have to deal with reality, and of course we can now pretend that there's no more fiat, and there's no more tax bureaucracy, and there's no more government, and there's just you and your Bitcoin. but unfortunately, we are not quite there yet, and I think navigating that will be really interesting. I'm just very interested in like, if we are ever getting to a state where there's like Bitcoin and nothing else. And I think one thing that maybe people also don't plan to is if we get to a Bitcoin world, there will be an incentive to do investment again, because Bitcoin is matured, and yes, it will still grow. Like it will still grow a little bit with the deflationary force. I mean, we're talking now like tens of years, hundreds of years out, maybe like 200 years out, where Bitcoin is so mature, where it's no longer growing. It's just like growing with the deflationary force of the monetary, of our human invention craft, or whatever you want to call it. And then you have an incentive again to invest in companies and to invest in maybe real estate, invest in other things again, because Bitcoin is kind of matured, and you have again an incentive to invest in other things. I don't know. It's a really interesting thought experiment for me, where how does personal finance look like on a full flexed Bitcoin standard?
Yeah, for sure. I think in some ways we're already there. So, and not because we're already on this Bitcoin standard, like you mentioned, but just because there are now financialized products that have come out that are tangential to Bitcoin, right? And so, like a financial advisor like me, or really anybody, right? You can't give financial advice on investment products without being a financial advisor and without having, maybe the rules will change in the future where they won't have such, stringent oversight from the government into my profession. But for now, they do. So my hands are very tied when people come to me and they just say, well, I don't want to go to your financial planning practice because I don't need all that stuff that you're offering. I just need like, pointed investment advice. Should I own, the MicroStrategy prefers, or should I just own Bitcoin? I'm like, well, that's literally an investment. I like, my hands are tied. Once you start asking me about, these preferred stocks, all of a sudden I'm quote unquote relevant in the industry again, according to these Bitcoiners who are saying that we're not relevant. And the reality is that we are, right? Even questions on the ETF. The ETF is a product while Bitcoin is not, right? MicroStrategy is a product while Bitcoin is not. And then all of these other things have come out where people are asking about, like Misty, or I don't remember what the other one is. And these are again financialized products. And so I totally see what you're saying, right? I think that that in general, people want to outperform. And so if you're getting like Bitcoin returns, you're getting used to Bitcoin returns. Now you're trying to think, okay, how can I outperform Bitcoin? Even though like I know Bitcoin is like the main balance sheet asset that I hold, right? But what else am I going to hold on top of that? So I think in some ways we are there. And I do agree that in the future that we will continue to be there. And I think there will actually be like a wider plethora really that people can invest in on top of Bitcoin as a result of that. This being the beginning of Bitcoin treasury companies, in my opinion, and that like from there it won't just end, right? I don't know necessarily what the next thing will be, right? But I'm sure that there'll be something else that's built on top of the Bitcoin ecosystem that people will want to be involved in. And so, yeah, I think it'll be kind of funny to see. Maybe it does come full circle where all of a sudden financial advisors had this sort of like small time period where we weren't that relevant because people were just saving in Bitcoin, but then all of a sudden it's making a comeback. Comeback is already happening. It was kind of funny. I remember thinking even 3 years ago, oh, maybe I won't need to be registered anymore. Maybe I can just like become a Bitcoin consultant and I just have clients who all hold Bitcoin. And I do financial planning outside the system and I don't need to worry about my regulator anymore. And within a couple of years that was done because, people have tons of questions about all the new stuff that's coming out.
What are actually the most common questions you get from Bitcoiners?
Yeah. Okay. So, I always get asked price projections, which I don't like to give because I don't know. Obviously, like I can shake my crystal ball, and if I could, then I would. So I always get asked that. I get asked about the cycles a lot. Do I think the cycles are over? I tend to think that they might be at this point, but I'm also, I'm not gonna. That's not a hill I'm gonna die on. Like, I'm not gonna tell people like I'm 100% sure the cycles are over this time. I do think though, compared to past cycles, that this is starting to feel like maybe we have more natural buyers in the market, and because less supply is coming onto the market, that it's less of a supply shock than it has been previously, and so forth. And that because Bitcoin has become such a large asset class, that maybe now we are starting to become into the more mature area of Bitcoin where we don't have these cycles. But again, I'm open to being wrong. So you can, people can send their hate mail or not. I get a lot of questions about borrowing against Bitcoin and whether or not it makes sense. And I tend to see that as something that's kind of more individual use casey rather than like blanket, yes, you should borrow. People just don't like to sell their Bitcoin. So what I found is that I get a lot of questions from Bitcoiners around how can I still have all this Bitcoin but do all these things that I actually want to do because I have now, amassed a bigger net worth than I thought I'd ever have. And I've been, delaying buying, a new shirt. I've been delaying buying, putting an engine in my car, even though I've, had the check engine light on for 2 years and things like that, where you're like, it's time. It's okay. Like, just sell a little bit and fix your engine, make sure your kids are driving in a safe car, that kind of stuff. And then I also get on the other side people who already feel like we're living in this Bitcoin world and like their situation is not like, it's not reality. Because if you're projecting like $1 million, let's say Bitcoin price, then you don't actually think you need to save as much today as maybe you do if we don't get that price as quickly as you're hoping that we get, right? In which case, sometimes people are spending more than they should as a result of living in this like fantasy Bitcoin world, which I do think will come to fruition, but the timeline again is that question. So, yeah.
That's an interesting one. I never thought about that. Because I usually get Bitcoiners that want to save more and are like tending to be more greedy than they should be, not too spendy. Maybe that's just my bubble in my environment. But I get a lot of those like, I want more purchasing power, but I don't want to sell my Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like you can only have one of that, and even if you borrow against it, yeah, like you also there's a cost to that. If it would be completely free, everyone would do it. If there's no risk and no disadvantages to that, like then it would be an easier call. Like, oh, of course, borrow against the Bitcoin. It's free money. Like there's no free money.
Exactly. I think that people compare, like they're like, okay, they're projecting out what they think Bitcoin is going to do in the next, 5 years or so, but they're not taking into account that these loans are short term. And so these loans tend to be anywhere between 6 months to 1 year. Have to roll it, right? And margin calls are very tight. And so like in the traditional finance world, I actually think they do a better job with this with margin calling. The margin calls come around 2:00 and they give you time basically to put money into the account before they sell you out. Whereas in the Bitcoin world, they basically send you an email and they sell you out. So it's kind of been shocking to me to see that, and that all of the companies have moved in that direction who are doing the lending. Like they don't give any kind of wiggle room on, and in that case, it's like, okay, then you need to either be putting up a lot more collateral than you otherwise would be to take a smaller amount of a loan so that you don't put yourself in that situation. But then you're putting up collateral in a place where potentially they can rehypothecate, right? Because you don't, it's not a like a multi-sig loan like maybe would be a better way of doing it. And so there are definitely more risks associated, I think, with borrowing against Bitcoin than borrowing against fiat. However, in the fiat world, what's kind of come out now, which I find really interesting, is that you can actually borrow against fiat products that have popped up that are Bitcoin tangential. So like you can get lending value on, let's say, like the MicroStrategy prefers or on MicroStrategy itself, or let's say than what you could get for a traditional financial product. But you have now, you're in like the traditional fiat world where lending terms might be a little bit better and so forth. And you might have a little more flexibility. So, but again, if you're just a hardcore Bitcoiner who doesn't want to sell your Bitcoin, now all of a sudden you'd have to sell your Bitcoin to be able to own this fiat product. It gets a little complicated and convoluted, right? And it kind of puts, I think, Bitcoiners in a place where they're like, this isn't really what I'm comfortable with, right? I wanted to hold Bitcoin. I don't want to hold a receivable on Bitcoin or whatever else it is. So, I think for like the traditional financial world where people have been doing this and they just allocate a little bit to Bitcoin and it's part of their portfolio and they're borrowing, it's not as big of a deal as somebody saying, okay, I'm 100% Bitcoin and now all of a sudden I'm going to like own the ETF so I can borrow it and all these other things.
It's for me very interesting because the borrowing against your Bitcoin right now, all the products that I see are not only short term, as you mentioned, they are usually like 12 to 18 months. This is the longest that I've seen, which is very short term in my opinion. They are also high interest rate. Like they have 12, 13, sometimes over 15% of interest rates, where I'm asking like, couldn't you get a better loan just without borrowing against your Bitcoin, not taking the risk of losing your Bitcoin and still getting the liquidity right now? And if you can't get a better loan, maybe you shouldn't borrow against your Bitcoin in the first place. Those are the thoughts that I have with that whole topic of like, why should you borrow against a Bitcoin when you can just get a traditional loan? And if you can't get a traditional loan, maybe there's a reason for that.
Yeah, totally. I couldn't agree more. I don't think it is a good practice to be borrowing for discretionary spending. Like I think people like to look at it because they're like, okay, if all the math works out, then yeah, I end up with a lot more Bitcoin if I'm spending in fiat terms. But you are rolling this loan, right? So in year one, let's say you spend 100 grand and you borrow against your Bitcoin. In year two, when you roll the loan, you're rolling that 100,000 because you spent it, right? It's not like you're gonna get that back somehow later. Like you're just using it as discretionary spending. So now you're rolling the 100. You're paying a fee to roll it, and then you're taking out another 100, right? And you're doing that every single year. So your loan is compounding. And like the idea basically in people's minds is that, okay, Bitcoin's compounding faster and therefore I'll net out better. But you might not. Like you might end up in, I don't know, in year 5, market takes a huge dip. And all of a sudden now you're sold out of all your Bitcoin and now you can't borrow anymore. Right. So like there's one of these things where it's like we're rolling this loan and it keeps getting bigger. Right? You might end up worse off. And so I do tell that to people in general that like if you end up over allocating to Bitcoin, you most likely will end up with less Bitcoin. That's generally what happens.
Yeah. And I had that question in my mind so long in the beginning of the year, and I came to peace with just selling Bitcoin if I need to, because I am in a position where 70 to 80% of my income is in Bitcoin, but only around 10 to 20% of my expenses, maybe 30%, depending on the month. Some freelancers don't always want the Bitcoin thing. So I naturally have to sell Bitcoin that I get in the same month that I get it to cover fiat bills. Like that's a very natural thing. And I postponed it for as long as I possibly can. Like I had like overdrafts on my bank account. I was like, oh, like maybe one more month. And at some point I was like, okay, either I borrow against my stack or I sell some. And I just couldn't borrow against my stack. That it just felt wrong. And I was just like, okay, the accumulated Bitcoin, if there's like, if I get more income than I have expenses, so I can stack sats. Why do I care that I sold some? Like I still have more Satoshis at the end of the month than in the beginning of the month.
Yes,
like why do I care that I sold Bitcoin away? I still have more Bitcoin at the end of the month. It's just money at that point. But I really like, this was like struggling 3-4 months to figure out like how can I mentally spend Bitcoin, because it was so ingrained in me not to sell my Bitcoin. How I came up with a solution, I don't know how you do it or how you advise to do it. I just made a specific spending wallet. like that's literally, there's money coming in and then there is money going out, and the thing that stays above goes to my savings Bitcoin. It sounds weird, but it really helped me go over this hump of I don't want to sell my Bitcoin.
No, I think it's a great way of approaching it. Mental accounting, actually. Some people just need it, where you just need extra, like you need sub accounts and so forth. People even do it in the fiat world where they have they have their vacation savings and they actually like split that out as their own thing that they are like putting money into. And then when they actually spend it, they feel better, as opposed to just accumulating it with all their other savings. Then it feels like you're spending your savings. And so it's one of those things where like, yeah, our mind does actually play tricks on us. And so if like, you're going to spend that money, which it sounds like you do, then yeah, it should be earmarked for spending, because it does make it easier to then see, okay, this is what I really intended to allocate towards savings. And now I don't have to feel bad about the fact that I'm spending what I'm supposed to be spending, because the whole reason why you're working, I'm assuming, is not just to save, but also to fund your current life.
Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.